Commission on Judicial Appointments is now in session. Chief Justice Tani Cantillo Sakaue presiding. Please be seated.
Good afternoon. Welcome to the California Supreme Court. This is the time and place for the public hearing of the Commission on Judicial Appointments to consider the appointment by Governor Edmund G. Brown, Jr. of Professor Goodwin H. Liu to the office of Associate Justice of the Supreme Court of California. As the Chief Justice of California, I serve as chair of the Commission on Judicial Appointments. The other members of the commission are Attorney General Kamala Harris, and to my left, Justice Joan Dempsey Klein, the Senior Presiding Justice of the Second Appellate District. Amoy Kim serves as secretary to the commission. And before we call on our speakers this afternoon, Presiding Justice Joan Dempsey Klein would like to say a few words.
Well, just as a matter of kind of personal privilege, if you view the three of us up here, that's the historical aspect of this, among other reasons. Back in 1934, there was a proposition proposed. And the reason for the proposition was that judicial offices and officers had become prizes to be fought for in the political arena rather than positions of trust and confidence. So the thought was we were going to free appointments to the bench from political influence. And the people passed this proposition, and they set up this commission on qualifications, and that's what it was chosen, a three-man ex officio body. And this is the first time in the history of this commission that there are three competent women sitting here today. That's it. Okay.
Well, Justice Klein, thank you for that bit of history. And all of us here know that you had a hand in that. Thank you. The Commission is in receipt of a letter from Governor Brown appointing Professor Liu to fill a vacancy created by the retirement of Associate Justice Carlos R. Moreno. The state constitution specifies that an appointment by the governor to the Supreme Court is effective when confirmed by the Commission on Judicial Appointments. The Commission has also received letters from various organizations and members of the public regarding the confirmation of Professor Liu. These letters were made available to the press and to the public as outlined in the Commission guidelines. Pursuant to a request by Governor Brown, the Commission on Judicial Nominations Evaluation, the State Bar, known to us as Jenny or JNE, has undertaken an evaluation of the qualifications of Professor Liu. Ms. Alice Salvo, chair of that commission, is present today to publicly announce the results of that evaluation and will do so later in the hearing. Professor Liu has asked the following persons be called to testify on his behalf: Chris Edley, Dean at UC Berkeley, Bolt Hall; Benita Brahmbot, former student of Professor Liu; David Sklansky, professor of law at UC Berkeley, Bolt Hall; Nancy O'Malley, Alameda County District Attorney; the Honorable Elwood Louie, former Justice of California Court of Appeal; Deborah Zumwalt, General Counsel at Stanford University, and Holly Fujie of the Asian Pacific American Bar Association of Los Angeles County. These witnesses will testify first, and in the order just named. Dean Edley.
Madam Chief Justice, Attorney General Harris, and Justice Dempsey Klein. Forgive me for relying on my text. It's the only way for me to be succinct. My name is Christopher Edley, and for the past 7 years I've served as Dean of UC Berkeley School of Law, known to us here as Bolt Hall. I came to Berkeley after 23 years on the Harvard Law faculty and 2 tours of duty working for 2 presidents of the United States, and over my career I've worked with countless judges, lawyers, and government officials. Based on my experience and knowing about Goodwin Liu, the confirmation question before you today is, if you will forgive a technical academic term, a no-brainer. I knew Goodwin even before I came to Bolt because he and I have shared interests in civil rights law and policy, especially as it relates to public education. In this field, Goodwin is a national leader, a preeminent leader, respected by scholars, lawyers, and policymakers across the political spectrum at every level of government. His award-winning scholarship on educational equity has been influential not only in academia, but also in Washington and in Sacramento. When Goodwin came up for tenure a few years ago, there were not enough superlatives to describe the intellectual quality and practical impact of his work. But Goodwin is not only a brilliant scholar, he is also an excellent teacher. I was thrilled, but not at all surprised that Goodwin won UC Berkeley's highest teaching award 2 years ago. In the classroom, Goodwin demonstrates a range of important qualities: patience, clarity, organization, humor, a balanced temperament, and good listening skills. All skills that will make him equally successful on the bench. I have no doubt that he will quickly earn the respect of lawyers who appear before the court and his future colleagues throughout the judiciary. Finally, let me say a word about Goodwin as a colleague. A faculty is a collection of smart, excruciatingly smart, strong-willed individuals with diverse interests and personalities and no real boss. Believe me, I've tried. My goal as dean is to make the whole greater than the sum of the parts. And 3 years ago, when I was looking for a partner in that enterprise, I turned to Goodwin because I knew there was no one on the faculty more widely respected or more genuinely admired for his fairness, collegiality, and good judgment. And that's why I appointed him Associate Dean only 5 years into his academic career, literally before the ink was dry on his promotion with tenure. The very qualities that we, his colleagues, have valued so much in Goodwin are, I predict, ones that you, his future colleagues, will value as well. Losing Goodwin from Bolt makes me very sad, and I'm somewhat ambivalent about today. It does give me some satisfaction to be happy for him personally, to be happy for all of you to whom I pass the joy of his colleagueship, and for the people of California. Public service is part of Goodwin's DNA, and the court will be very lucky to have him for his many talents. Thank you, and of course I'd be pleased to answer any questions.
Thank you. Any questions from the commission members? Thank you, Dean Edley. Benita Brahmbot.
Good afternoon, Chief Justice Kantil Sakaue, Attorney General Harris, and Presiding Justice Klein. I'm honored and humbled to speak here today in support of Professor Goodwin Liu's nomination to the California Supreme Court. I met Professor Liu about 4 years ago as a first-year law student in his constitutional law course. After that, I worked as his teaching assistant, took another course with him, and sought his mentorship throughout law school. After graduating in 2010, I clerked for Judge Diane Wood on the 7th Circuit Court of Appeals, and next month I will start working at the San Francisco law firm Kecker and Van Nest. It is my privilege to set forth publicly, if only briefly, the profound impact that Professor Liu has had on me as a student and a lawyer. While Professor's expertise as a legal scholar is well known, It is his skill as an instructor and his passion for justice that inspires the students in his classroom. Since time is short, I'll focus today on why so many students at Berkeley Law, including myself, identify Professor Liu's constitutional law course as the touchstone in their intellectual development. He approached the course with an enthusiasm that conveyed the relevance of each day's materials to the issues facing our society. He compelled us to think through the tough questions posed by the text, rather than merely identify answers that could be gleaned from reading the cases. Ultimately, the questions Professor Liu raised on the values of our constitutional system, the meaning of equality, and the role of the judiciary were some of the most difficult I've grappled with as a law student. As Professor Liu's teaching assistant, I got a better sense of the deliberate preparation and the dexterity it took to construct the open, yet intellectually rigorous atmosphere that is the hallmark of Professor Liu's classroom. I observed how he sought to include more voices into each day's discussion rather than to allow the vocal few to dominate. He believed that even the most complex constitutional doctrines were within the grasp of every student. More importantly, he asked guided questions to encourage different viewpoints on each day's topics, illuminating how divergent political positions can have legitimate legal justifications. And when it appeared that the majority of the class shared a particular view on a topic, Professor Liu presented valid counterarguments and encouraged the participation of students with different perspectives. Indeed, his skill as an even-handed mediator was put into the sharpest relief when he presented controversial material. Not once did he permit a student to rely on mere rhetoric to support her view. He taught us to think critically about the different sides of any issues and to articulate the strongest legal justifications in support of specific arguments. These features of Professor Liu's teaching style, his ability to see the complexity inherent in any problem, and his capacity to appreciate and to have others understand the legitimacy of countervailing arguments embody what I believe would be the defining mark of his judicial methodology. I saw time and again how he approached each class with an open mind, eager to be challenged and enriched by student questions and comments. I'm confident that Professor Liu will bring these skills to bear on his judicial work if this commission supports his nomination to the California Supreme Court. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Bromelbot. Any questions from the commission members?
No questions.
Thank you.
Thank you. David Sklansky.
Chief Justice Kato Sakaue, Attorney General Harris, Presiding Justice Klein, good afternoon. I'm grateful for this opportunity to testify about Goodwin Liu's nomination to the state Supreme Court. Professor Liu and I have been colleagues on the law faculty at the University of California at Berkeley since 2005. We teach and write in different fields. He's a nationally admired scholar of constitutional law and education law. I'm a former prosecutor, and I write and teach about criminal law and criminal procedure. But I've read a fair bit of Professor Liu's writings about constitutional law and education law, and at this point I think I've read everything that he's written about criminal law. I've also worked with Professor Liu repeatedly on matters of law school governance. We've served together on the law school's hiring committee. He was my supervisor during the years that he served as associate dean at Berkeley. I've watched him mediate faculty conflicts, assess personnel cases, and debate difficult and divisive questions of academic policy. All of this has given me an opportunity to assess Professor Liu's intellect, his legal expertise, and his character. And it makes me incredibly excited about the prospect of having Professor Liu sit in our state Supreme Court. I'm enthusiastic and excited as his colleague, but even more enthusiastic and excited as a Californian. In each and every one of my interactions with Professor Liu, I've been impressed not only with his powerful intellect, but also with his character, his decency, his open-mindedness, and his even-handedness. You actually get to see a lot of a person's character when you work together at a law school, maybe especially when you work together at a law school in Berkeley. And what I've seen in Professor Liu, without exception, is someone who is deeply principled, who never ducks a hard issue or shrinks from taking an unpopular stand, but also someone who's the very opposite of arrogant, someone who listens to and understands the views of people he disagrees with, and who almost always winds up earning their deep respect. someone who builds consensus, but in the very best way, not by splitting the difference between right and wrong, but through leadership, intelligence, and demonstrable, unerring fairness. It's clear to me that Professor Liu would be an extraordinary addition to the Supreme Court of California, not only because of his erudition and intellect, but also, and more importantly, because of the kind of person he is. I also know, through many, many conversations with faculty and students, that this is the widely shared, if not universal view of all of those who, like me, have been fortunate enough to have had Professor Liu as a colleague or a teacher. This is an exciting day for California and for our state judiciary, and I thank you again for allowing me to be part of it.
Thank you, Mr. Sklansky. Any questions? Next, we'll hear from Nancy O'Malley.
Good afternoon, Chief Justice Cantil Sakuye, Attorney General Harris, and Justice Dempsey Klein. It is my great honor and pleasure to testify before you, three of the most prominent and esteemed women leaders in our community, to speak in support of Professor Goodwin Liu's nomination to the California Supreme Court. As the Chief Justice said, I'm Nancy O'Malley, the District Attorney of Alameda County, and I'm also here representing the California Women Lawyers, who is one of the largest organizations of women lawyers in the world, and we stand in full support of Professor Liu's nomination. As the District Attorney of Alameda County, I'm also proud to speak on behalf of my fellow resident of Alameda County, a brilliant legal scholar and an individual of unquestioned integrity with the highest standards. When confirmed, Professor Liu will join this very esteemed court that presides over the nation's most populous state, whose ever-expanding legal issues represent the very challenges that our country face and whose people represent the diversity of the world. This court oversees a state court system where it is estimated that nearly 70% of the participants are doing so in a criminal court environment. And victims of crime, as well as those accused of crime, deserve, demand, and require a court system that promotes the fair administration of justice. And its justices stand and bear the weighty responsibility of ensuring that our justice system is the true hallmark of our democracy. Professor Liu's background, his life experiences, and the actions of public awareness make him uniquely qualified to this position. As a career prosecutor, I have seen the expanding challenges our court system faces in dealing with the impact of crime on our communities. And I'm delighted to support a nominee whose life reflects not only an awareness of these challenges, but a true understanding and willingness for the court to engage and address the critical societal issues. Professor Liu's background is very much like millions of people who live in California, people who seek justice from me, my office, and from the courts. His early life in America, like so many of our fellow citizens, draws a remarkable picture of experiences. A family new to America with little influence and little English, seeking for a life that would be better for their children. And from those early years to today, we have to reflect that Professor Liu it would have been easy for him to benefit from the financial rewards that our profession offers because of his background, because of his experience. It could have been another first-generation American success story of someone whose monetary achievement would have been the marker of his career and his success. But that is not the life Professor Liu chose to lead. He is respected by his students and colleagues and leaders like myself for his intellect, his clarity, and his collegiality. And not being one to sit back and watch the world go by, Professor Liu comes with practical ideas to better society and to advocate for fairness and equal access. He has not forgotten the roots of his own personal success, a close-knit family, hard work, and the value of advancement through education. And he will be a justice that truly understands the freedoms and responsibilities of all in society. On a personal note, I first had the pleasure of getting to know Professor Liu's wife, Ann O'Leary. And they are wonderful parents of 2 children who share the same hopes and dreams of all parents of young children in California, that their kids live in a society that is safe, healthy, fair, and full of opportunity to live life to its fullest. In Professor Goodwin Liu, Governor Brown has nominated the best of the best. The California Women Lawyers and I enthusiastically support his nomination, and I thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Ms. O'Malley. Any questions? Thank you. the Honorable Elwood Louis.
Chief Justice Kante Sakauwe, Attorney General Harris, and Justice Klein. It is my distinct honor to urge this commission to confirm Professor Goodwin Liu as an Associate Justice of the California Supreme Court. Professor Liu is a highly regarded academician whose intellectual ability is superb and is amply demonstrated in his many scholarly writings. His colleagues in academia, government, and the legal profession have spoken of his character, objectivity, and fairness. He has a well-rounded background, and that will serve him well on this court. He was an outstanding student and scholar who was educated in public schools, then at Stanford University, at Yale Law School, and then as a Rhodes Scholar at Oxford. What is remarkable is that he was able to deftly switch from a likely career in medicine to philosophy and finally to the law. Some of us, speaking for myself, can only hope to attempt to master just one of these disciplines, not three. And Justice Klein, on top of that, I understand that he's a very good tennis player, so you should be aware.
All right.
His experience in the law includes service at the United States Department of Justice and as an appellate litigator of Melvin E. Myers, where he was known for his legal ability and his collegiality. He joined Bolt Hall in 2003 and quickly established himself as a gifted scholar and teacher, as the dean has just told you. His demonstrated intellect, legal acumen, and ability to write with clarity and precision will make him an asset to the court. His warm personality and his friendly nature will make him a welcome addition to his colleagues on the court. He's a man of unlimited energy, devoted to his wife Anne, his children Violet and Emmett, and to his parents. He has a long-standing demonstrated commitment to public service. I've had the pleasure of knowing Professor Liu for several years. He's a delightful person, warm, friendly, and down to earth. Almost too good to be true, but yes, he's that good. In the last decade or so, I have served as chair of the White House Selection Committee for appointments to the Central District of California, and also advisor to 2 governors on appointments to the state trial and appellate courts. I reviewed literally hundreds of applications for judicial appointments. Professor Liu's list of accomplishments is rare, and even more remarkable given his age. I do not recall any other judicial candidate who has achieved what he has at any age. I have argued many cases before the federal and state appellate courts, and I can tell you that my fellow appellate practitioners in California welcome a person of Professor Liu's abilities and are pleased that he will participate in the decisions on their client matters. You have in your hand a letter signed by 27 of my fellow members of the California Academy of Appellate Lawyers endorsing his confirmation to the Supreme Court. Finally, Professor Liu and I share a common experience, as both of us are the sons of immigrant parents who came to this country to find a better place for their children. Professor Liu's parents, both medical doctors, made that journey for him and his older brother. His parents should be applauded for what they did for themselves and their family. Professor Liu took advantage of what this country has to offer, and he worked and worked to achieve everything that he has accomplished. He is deserving of this appointment to the court, and I urge you to confirm this appointment. I would please answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you.
I have no questions.
Thank you. No questions.
Thank you.
Next, we'll hear from Deborah Zumwalt.
Good afternoon, Madam Chief Justice, Attorney General Harris, and Presiding Judge Dempsey Klein. My name is Deborah Zumwalt, and I'm the Vice President and General Counsel at Stanford University, and I've been practicing law here in California for over 30 years. I'm really pleased and honored to be here and be able to speak in support of Goodwin Liu, a prominent alumnus of Stanford and a current member of Stanford's Board of Trustees. Indeed, I'd like to point out that he has truly bipartisan support. Berkeley and Stanford are in agreement. We both claim his as our own, and we are in agreement in terms of his eminent qualifications and great fitness for this wonderful position that he's been offered. I would like to note that I've submitted some letters also in support of his nomination, including from 8 business leaders who are also members of the Stanford Board of Trustees and from 3 of Stanford's presidents. The current president of Stanford, John Hennessy, could not be here today, but he asked me to reiterate his support for Goodwin Liu's nomination. He has described him as a preeminent student at Stanford, a distinguished and involved alumnus, and an invaluable member of the Board of Trustees of Stanford University. He is widely regarded as insightful, hardworking, collegial, and of the highest ethical standards. Goodwin Liu is a Phi Beta Kappa graduate of Stanford, where he won numerous awards for his academic excellence, for his leadership, and for his contributions to the university. He was co-president of the student body of Stanford and helped fund the Haas Center for Public Service. I'm not sure there are many awards at Stanford that he did not win. As has been mentioned, he also got a Rhodes Scholarship where he studied at Oxford and then went on to Yale. But since his graduation, he has continued in these same paths of academic excellence, leadership, and public service. He is acclaimed, as we've heard, for his brilliant scholarship and his lucid and thoughtful writing. He has continued his public service, clerking for Justice Ginsburg, working for the U.S. Department of Education, and volunteering innumerable hours to public interest organizations. He was elected to the governing board of Stanford University in 2008. And I just wanted to briefly quote from a letter from 8 of his fellow trustees that has been submitted, saying, across a wide range of complex issues, Goodwin routinely asks thoughtful and incisive questions. He is good at thinking independently and zeroing in on important issues that need attention. Even in a room full of highly accomplished leaders, Goodwin is impressive. He is insightful, constructive, and a good listener. Moreover, he possesses a remarkably even temperament. His demeanor is unfailingly respectful and open-minded, never dogmatic or inflexible. In short, Goodwin's strengths are exactly what we need in a judge. In the years that I have known Goodwin Liu, he has demonstrated all of these admirable qualities and more, and shown himself to be both a distinguished scholar of the law and a person of great integrity and ethics. Goodwin Liu has epitomized the goals of Stanford's founders, which were to promote the public welfare by exercising an influence on behalf of humanity and civilization, teaching the blessings of liberty regulated by law, and inculcating love and reverence for the great principles of government. I recommend Goodwin Liu without any reservation for the very important honor and responsibility of being appointed as an Associate Justice of the California Supreme Court.
Thank you, Ms. Umwalt. Any questions?
Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we'll hear from Holly Fujie.
Thank you. Chief Justice Kantil Sakaue, Attorney General Harris, and Senior Presiding Justice Klein. First of all, I'm afraid I have to digress for a second just to say, as a woman of color who's been practicing law in California for over 30 years, how meaningful and moving it is to speak before such a distinguished panel and to have you three amazing, diverse, and powerful women up there. So it makes me very proud to be a Californian. But on to business. I would say the hardest thing about being here batting seventh in this distinguished lineup is to speak about Professor Goodwin Liu is that there are only so many superlatives in the English language. And I don't want to repeat what's been said before, and I don't want to cover ground that I know is going to be covered by the people coming after me. For example, the Asian Pacific American Bar Association of Los Angeles asked me to convey its unconditional and enthusiastic support for the confirmation of Professor Liu. But the position of the APA Bar will be more than ably represented by the speakers who will be coming after me. And as president of the Bolt Hall Alumni Association, I could speak of how the Berkeley law community is only willing to forego Professor Liu's immeasurable contributions to the school because it knows that his contributions to the court will be even greater. But since no one else here is a former president of the California State Bar, that is going to be my perspective here. Because all 200,000+ of us rely every day on the opinions of the California Supreme Court. And the competence and impartiality of each member of that court is vitally important to us and to our clients. To this end, I read virtually all of the dozens, if not hundreds, of articles and speeches Professor Liu has written, so I've beaten Professor Slansky, who only read the criminal ones. That's a stack of documents about as tall as I am, frankly. I wanted to see if he exhibited any bias or political viewpoint which might interfere with his ability to act as a fair and impartial judge. I found none. To be perfectly frank, what I was really doing in reading literally thousands of pages of brilliant prose on such exciting topics as securities law and obscure provisions of various codes was to see if anywhere in there, perhaps in a footnote, He said that he wanted to overthrow the American government. He didn't. So instead, what I found was the work of a brilliant legal scholar who rationally and even-handedly analyzed all issues presented to him and who had a deep respect for the rule of law and for the U.S. and California constitutions. But more than that, I saw a man who was able to transcend classification in the political spectrum because he sees the issues with an open and inquiring mind, and he seeks to understand and learn from those who have different perspectives and experiences from his own. His own broad experience as the child of immigrants, as a U.S. Supreme Court clerk, an appellate lawyer, and a professor, and his work in both private practice and public service give him a unique and ideal background for this position. Finally, as someone who has described herself in the past as a Justice Carlos Moreno groupie, because of my great admiration for his intelligence, compassion, and humanity, to say that I believe Professor Goodwin Liu to be an extremely worthy successor to Justice Moreno says it all. I believe, and in fact I know, that he will be a great credit to this commission, to Governor Brown, to the courts, and to the people of the state of California. Thank you for allowing me to speak on his behalf.
Thank you, Ms. Fougier. Any questions?
Thank you.
Thank you.
In addition to those who just testified, the following individuals wrote to the Commission requesting to testify in support of Professor Liu's appointment. They are Malcolm Young, President of the Asian American Bar Association of the Greater Bay Area, Dr. Robert Nolan, and Paul Hirose, President of the National Asian Pacific American Bar Association. These witnesses will testify next, and in the order just named. Mr. Young.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Thank you very much for allowing the Asian American Bar Association to be here this afternoon and testify on behalf of Professor Goodwin Liu. I'm the president of the Asian American Bar Association of the Greater Bay Area. On behalf of our organization, our board of directors, our nearly 600 members, and our network of 2,200 Asian American attorneys from across the Bay Area, I'm proud to express our unequivocal support for Professor Goodwin Liu's nomination to the California Supreme Court. The Asian American Bar Association is the nation's oldest bar association representing and serving Asian American attorneys. We're also one of the nation's largest local minority bar associations and the largest one here in the Bay Area. Our members consist of practicing attorneys, judges, law students, elected officials, advocates, organizers, and policymakers. From Democrats and Republicans to independents and even those curious individuals who classify themselves as declined to state. Together we represent a broad swath of the political and legal spectrum. Through Professor Liu's journey for confirmation to the Ninth Circuit these past 2 years, we've gotten to know what a remarkable individual and judicial candidate he is. His journey has reminded us that to get anywhere, we need to get there together. And our ABBA members have risen to that call. The luminaries of our organization, members like Dale Manami and Edwin Prather, who are here today, have relentlessly worked to garner support for Professor Liu, and in the process, they have called on ABBA members to engage collectively in that process. I am proud to say that our members have responded in ways both large and small. We've signed petitions, written letters, thrown and participated in viewing parties, held press conferences, and submitted editorials. I believe that we have committed to this process because Professor Liu is a living articulation of the stories and aspirations of our members. He is the son of immigrant parents who came to this country seeking greater opportunity. Professor Liu worked his way through this country's education system, using it to his advantage by excelling at every level. He grabbed opportunities where he could and made the most of them. And along the way, he has given back in so many ways. He was part of the team that helped launch AmeriCorps, which I was a member of. He has served on the board of local and national civil rights organizations, and he's worked in his community by volunteering at schools and civic organizations. Professionally, Professor Liu's career shows us just how broad our impact can be as the children of immigrants. Supreme Court clerk, professor of law, and associate dean at one of the nation's most prestigious schools, and also my alma mater. His resume alone tells us a remarkable story of success. But add to that his rigorous and courageous intellectual contributions in the area of educational equity, and you find a legal mind of unsurpassed quality. Our members are excited that we now have an opportunity to keep Professor Liu for ourselves. here in the California Supreme Court. This court, without a doubt, plays a lead role in developing the nation's jurisprudence. And for our members, certainly, the state court system impacts our practice and lives much more regularly and oftentimes much more significantly. On behalf of the Asian American Bar Association and our nearly 600 members, I urge you in the strongest way to confirm Professor Liu today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Yo. Any questions?
Thank you. Thank you.
We'll hear next from Dr. Robert Nolan.
Honorable members of the Commission, thank you very much for this opportunity to offer my individual comments in support of this proposed appointment of Professor Goodwin Liu. I'm Dr. Robert L. Nolan, a California physician since 1956 and a member of our state bar since 1968. I am trying today to bring to you the perspective from an individual citizen standpoint concerning this very important appointment. I first met Professor Liu a number of years ago on the occasion of his informal debate with a UC Berkeley law faculty colleague. Subsequently, I have attended meetings at which he was either a lecturer or a panelist at Bolt Hall, followed his career at the law school, and reviewed other materials. I have been most favorably impressed by him and found him to be scholarly, learned, highly intelligent, articulate, analytical, objective, insightful, knowledgeable, consistent, brilliant, eloquent, creative, innovative, respectful, wise, sensible, deliberate, reliable, judicious, considerate, precise, thorough, fair, impartial, open-minded, astute, friendly, collegial, dignified, discerning, talented, magnanimous, respected, and well-liked. Chief Justice Earl Warren is reported to have once said that a way to ruin a good mind is to send a person to law school. Obviously, that fate did not befall Professor Liu, who has a consistently outstanding record of achievements before, during, and after law school, all of which have been well documented. By virtue of his distinguished accomplishments and personal attributes, I believe Professor Liu is ideally suited for this position. I respectfully urge the Commission to confirm Professor Liu's appointment as Associate Justice of the Supreme Court of California.
Thank you, Dr. Nolan.
Thank you. Thank you.
We'll hear now from Mr. Paul Hirose.
Good afternoon, Chief Justice Cantil Sakue, Attorney General Harris, and Presiding Justice Dempsey Klein. My name is Paul Hirose, and I'm here as President of the National Asian Pacific American Bar Association. The PABA represents the interests of over 40,000 Asian Pacific American lawyers, judges, law professors, and law students, and over 60 local Asian Pacific American Bar Association, including almost 24 local bar associations here in California. Except for my 3 years of going away to law school, I've lived in California my whole life. I currently live in Los Angeles County, and I'm of counsel with the Perkins Coie Law Firm. I'm also marketing counsel with Isuzu North America Corporation in Orange County. NAPAB is very proud to support the nomination of Professor Liu. Just as we supported the nomination of Chief Justice last year and Justices Chin and Kennard before, we also support Professor Liu today. NAPABA has a deep interest in ensuring that Asian Pacific Americans are well represented in all categories of the legal profession. We have supported well-qualified nominees on a nonpartisan basis for both state and federal positions. Asian Pacific Americans are still underrepresented in the judiciary, both California and nationwide. However, with Professor Liu's confirmation, our community will have one more role model. Professor Liu's upbringing reflects the American attitude that with hard work, anyone can succeed. His parents came to the United States when Taiwan was under martial law and have admired and respected America for its commitment to the rule of law, a value that they passed on to him. Professor Liu attended public schools in California and graduated as co-valedictorian from Rio Americano High School in Sacramento. During high school, his interest in public service was sparked when the late Congressman Robert Matsui sponsored his application as a page in the U.S. House of Representatives. He later attended Stanford University and currently teaches at UC Berkeley School of Law. I must also share NAPABA's observations on Professor Liu's judicial temperament as displayed during his nomination to the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Ninth Circuit. Over the course of that process, we at NAPABA not only were impressed by the caliber of his mind and his sterling credentials, but also by his grace, his courage, and equanimity throughout the grueling process, which included over 5 hours of testimony before the Senate Judiciary Committee. NAPABA has also spoke with numerous people about Professor Liu's credentials, and based on those conversations, we are convinced Professor Liu will be an immediate asset to the Supreme Court. In sum, we are very proud to support Professor Liu's nomination, and we believe he will be an excellent judge. And I very much want to thank you for this opportunity to testify today.
Thank you, Mr. Hirose. Any questions?
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I now call upon Ms. Alice Salvo as to the results of the evaluation conducted by the State Bar's Commission on Judicial Nominees Evaluation.
Good afternoon, Chief Justice Kantil Sakaue, Attorney General Harris, and Presiding Justice Klein. I am Alice A. Salvo, the 2010 Chair of the Commission on Judicial Nominees Evaluation, or as we call it, the Jenny Commission. Thank you for this invitation and opportunity to appear on Jenny's behalf to report on our evaluation of Professor Goodwin Liu to serve as Associate Justice of the California Supreme Court. By statute, the Jenny Commission investigates and evaluates candidates for appointment to the state trial and appellate courts and reports to the governor in writing on their qualifications. This process is independent, thorough, and objective. It is also confidential. However, for persons appointed to the appellate bench, the Jenny Commission may disclose its written recommendations and the reasons therefor to the Commission on Judicial Appointments. At our meeting on August 23, 2011, the Jenny Commission found Professor Liu to be exceptionally well qualified to serve as Associate Justice of the California Supreme Court. This rating means that he has qualities and attributes of remarkable or extraordinary superiority that enable him to perform the appellate judicial function with distinction. The Commission's written report to the governor observed that Professor Liu possesses a brilliant intellect, along with exceptional gifts for research and writing, which allow him to parse complex and obscure legal doctrines and present them in the form of viable and understandable concepts. He is a gifted teacher and scholar who demonstrates an abiding concern for the American justice system and its administration. The candidate is universally praised for his many attributes, among which are impartiality, integrity, collegiality, and a work ethic second to none. His extraordinary background in constitutional law, as well as the breadth of his life experience and public service, will contribute a valuable perspective to the state's highest court. The candidate has past experience as a clerk for the United States Supreme Court and as a litigator with one of the country's largest and most respected law firms, during which time he handled significant amount of appellate work. Since 2003, he has been a highly respected professor at Berkeley School of Law and one of the nation's leading legal scholars on constitutional law and education law and policy. In addition, the candidate has been at the forefront of scholarship on some of the most challenging and important legal issues of the day, which will serve him extremely well in his work as an Associate Justice on the California Supreme Court. Professor Liu is widely praised for his diplomacy, integrity, impartiality, and collegiality. He is universally regarded as even-tempered, kind, thoughtful, compassionate, and empathetic. The candidate consistently demonstrates patience and sound judgment. He approaches all his decisions with deliberation and objectivity. He considers all points of view and is respectful of those expressing them. The candidate is fair and unbiased, listens well, and works easily with others. He remains poised and gracious in stressful situations and will be a thoughtful, collaborative, and judicious colleague on the bench. The candidate has a stellar reputation in the academic and legal communities. He is a serious, thoughtful person whose integrity and ethical standards are unquestioned by all those who know him. He is widely respected in the field of legal education and is considered an exceptionally gifted scholar and professor of law. Professor Liu is universally perceived as extremely hardworking. His exceptional accomplishments are a testament to his dedication and discipline. He has authored and published an astonishingly large number of scholarly works, articles, and essays. Within 5 years of commencing his work as a professor at the Berkeley School of Law, the candidate rose to the position of Associate Dean. He is committed to his teaching and legal scholarship, yet still find time to assume substantial law school committee assignments. He will bring great energy and enthusiasm to the court. The candidate frequently interacts with individuals from varying backgrounds and is always respectful. He is very sensitive to cultural differences and is comfortable and poised in his dealings with others. The candidate is not an ideologue and would not tolerate any kind of bias or discrimination. He has an unwavering commitment to equal access to justice and will treat all litigants fairly without regard to wealth, position, and society. His entire professional life has been in service to the benefit of others. Our written report further observed that Professor Liu has achieved great distinction through his legal research and writing, and the breadth of his experiences in public service, litigation, appellate work, and teaching will provide a very significant contribution to the state's highest court. His extraordinary scholarship has won the respect and acclaim of the legal community locally and nationally. He is an expert on constitutional law and education law and policy, and his knowledge and perspective in these vital areas will benefit the courts and the citizens of the state of California. The candidate will bring to the Supreme Court bench his outstanding qualifications and valuable experience in government and academia, and his exceptional gifts for research and writing will be vital in his work as an Associate Justice. The candidate will serve the court with dedication, integrity, honor, and distinction. His reputation for courtesy, respectfulness, and objectivity will enhance the collegial atmosphere of the court. The candidate will be an ideal addition to the Supreme Court bench because his judicious consideration of all points of view will facilitate intellectual debate. The candidate will be an excellent Associate Justice who will consider all arguments and precedents and will consistently issue well-written, carefully reasoned decisions. The court and the state will benefit from his jurisprudence. I am prepared to answer any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Salvo. That's a very thorough and comprehensive evaluation. We appreciate that. Any questions?
Thank you. I have no questions.
Okay.
I read that with real interest. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I now would like to ask Professor Liu to please come forward to present any statement that he might wish to make and to answer any questions that the members of the Commission might wish to put to him. Thank you, Professor Liu.
Thank you. Thank you and good afternoon. Chief Justice Cantil Sakaue, Attorney General Harris, and Justice Dempsey Klein. It's a genuine honor to be here. After listening to the remarks of the previous speakers, frankly, I'm overwhelmed. And I'm not here to offer rebuttal. I can only conclude that this has got to be the most pleasant and enjoyable judicial confirmation process anywhere in America. As you know, my family and I have been on a journey over the past couple years, and I could not be happier that it has brought me here in this courtroom before this distinguished commission and in the company of the distinguished justices of the California Supreme Court. It is so gracious of all of you to come, and I thank you for being here. I would like to thank Governor Jerry Brown for his confidence in me and for giving me this remarkable opportunity to serve the state of California. As you heard, my parents immigrated to the United States in the late 1960s and moved our family to Sacramento in 1977 when I was 6 years old. For 14 happy years, I grew up in the Golden State. I attended California public schools. I graduated from Rio Americano High School, a friendly rival, Madam Chief Justice, to your alma mater, C.K. McClatchy. And I had the good fortune to attend one of the state's great universities, Stanford. And after 12 years out of state in graduate school, law school, government service, and law practice, I came home to California in 2003, married to my talented and beautiful wife, Ann O'Leary, and blessed with the opportunity to teach at another one of the state's great universities, UC Berkeley. California has given so much to me, to my parents, and to my family today, and that is why I am so honored to have a chance to serve our state as a member of the California Supreme Court. My colleagues have been very generous to me in their testimony, and I am very grateful, and I can only hope that I will live up to all the adjectives that each of you managed to squeeze in to your 3 minutes. But let me also say this. I am honored but also deeply humbled by the prospect of serving on the California Supreme Court. I am conscious of the responsibilities of the office, the complexity of the cases, and the importance of the institution to our system of government. I believe my background will enable me to make a positive contribution to the court, but I also believe that no one person is likely to have all the wisdom and experience necessary to reach the best decision in every case. So if I am fortunate enough to be confirmed, I would look forward to working with and learning from my very accomplished and experienced colleagues on the court, knowing that the court is at its best when we bring our collective talents to the task of dispensing equal justice under law. I'm grateful to my family and to the many friends and colleagues who are here today, and to all of them, to all of you, the members of the Commission, I give my unwavering commitment to faithfully discharge the duties of this office and to uphold the rule of law. Thank you for the opportunity to give this statement, and I would be pleased to answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you, Professor. Any questions?
Thank you, Professor Liu. You've written extensively, you have taught extensively about the educational inequities that exist in our society, and particularly in public schools. California Supreme Court has recognized the right to a public education and that it is a fundamental right in California guaranteed by the California Constitution. What do you believe is the scope of the state right to a public education, and what does that mean to you?
Well, Attorney General Harris, I am aware of some of the precedents that the California Supreme Court has rendered in this area, and the subject of education is mentioned in the text of the California Constitution, I believe, in more than one article. It is difficult to answer the question of the scope of the right without some idea of the context of a litigated case. And I want to be careful because I'm also aware that there is a litigated case that's making its way through the California courts today. So if I may just say at a more general level, I think that this is one of those areas in which the California Constitution has some rather specific things to say. And the courts, as they do in all of these constitutional cases, would have to heed the text of the Constitution in addition to the applicable precedents. And I won't say any more because of the context of a possibly litigated case that could appear before this court.
Do you believe that it means simply that that the child has a right to go to a public school, or do you believe that there is a broader principle at play which suggests that there is a minimal quality of education?
I'm not familiar enough in my recollection with the precedents right at the moment to know where the law sits on that question. But I would say that that is the core subject of much of the litigation in this area. And this is one of those subjects that I have studied not only in California but also throughout the country. The litigants have presented typically one of two kinds of arguments before the state courts. One focused on the theory I believe that you just mentioned, the idea that there is a minimum baseline, and the other theory that there is some equality required in the provision of educational opportunity. Both of these theories, I believe, are at play still in the state courts, including the California courts. And there are precedents under the state constitution's equal protection guarantee that have spoken to the equality aspect. I'm less aware of whether or not there are precedents that have spoken to the adequacy aspect. And so I won't venture to speculate more about what the Constitution might require without the context of a litigated case.
And on another issue where California is unique, it is that our Constitution, unlike the United States Constitution, outlines that there is an inalienable right to privacy. And you've written extensively about how the court and the judiciary should then interpret the Constitution based on what is at play in the real world. So my question to you would be that given that when the Constitution was written, we didn't have this thing called the Internet, smartphones, iPads, what do you believe is the scope of the right to privacy at this point?
Yes, well, so I think that is one interesting area in which our Constitution is different and special. The answer I would give is that the notion of privacy, I think, especially related to the technologies that you just mentioned, is in a state of flux. Our expectations societally about what privacy we can have in text messages or the searches we do on the Internet, I think are still being worked out in workplaces, in homes, in government agencies throughout the state and, frankly, throughout the nation. And I think notions of privacy, even though not textually specified in the U.S. Constitution, have been elaborated in judicial doctrine in relation to what can reasonably be expected by an ordinary person using these technologies. One interesting touch point for this, and I don't know what its applicability would be to the context, again, of a litigated case before this court, is that in a recent case that the United States Supreme Court was addressing related to text messaging by police officers on duty, the court declined to decide the ultimate issue in the case about whether or not text messages were protected under a notion of privacy, simply because, and it noted this very frankly, the societal expectations around the use of these kinds of technologies and the privacy expectations have not congealed to a sufficient degree that a court could discern what a reasonable expectation might be. And so in this area, as in others too, the courts would have to tread, I think, carefully to not prematurely make constitutional rights out of things on which the applicable notion of reasonableness is still in a state of flux.
And you've written about that and the notion of where the mores of current society should play into an interpretation of the Constitution. On this issue of privacy and technology, do you believe also that there should be some reference to the text of the Constitution and the principles behind, obviously, our right to privacy in California?
Absolutely, Attorney General Harris. The text gives, I think, the essential hook on which this interpretive enterprise rests. So absolutely, that is true.
Thank you.
Justice Klein? I don't have any questions like that. I would just ask you if you would look favorably on Division 3 when you get any of our cases.
Well, I will pledge here that I will exhibit no fear or favoritism towards any of the judicial districts from which the cases might arise.
Thank you.
A judicious response, Professor. I have a general question, and that is your illustrious experiences in academia and education consulting are well known, highly regarded, widely admired, and all who've come here today have so stated. My question is, and you touched upon this briefly in your remarks, but my question is twofold, depending on the answer, and that is the role of a justice on the California Supreme Court similar to or different from your previous work experiences? And if different, what is your approach to the transition to Supreme Court justice?
Yes, obviously an excellent question. Madam Chief Justice, I think the roles are very different. And they are different in the following way. As a scholar, the job is primarily, I think, to be provocative, to be innovative, to be creative, and to work really at the edges of the law. Academic institutions don't reward people for merely restating what is already out there. They reward people for coming up with new ideas and new perspectives on the law. And frankly, a lot of what academics do is in the form of criticism. And then by this, I don't mean in a negative way. I mean they are looking at the law critically in order to figure out perhaps how to make it better. As a judge, the impulse, I think, is different. First of all, judges do not approach issues from the standpoint of abstraction. They are presented with a concrete issue in the context of a litigated case. And so there is an actual controversy between two parties who need a resolution of a dispute. And so the posture of how a question comes before a court is entirely different than how a question comes before an academic. Secondly, the contrast is made sharper, I think, even more sharp, by the idea that judges are bound by law, precedent, text, statutes, the applicable materials that are before you in ways that theory, criticism, interpretation are not available to the judge in the way that they are available to scholars. And so when a judge renders an opinion on a particular legal controversy, they are not writing what he or she may wish the law to be. They are not writing an abstract dissection of the flaws of a particular line of precedent. What they are doing is they are trying to make the best interpretation of the applicable law to that concrete litigated case. This folds into the second part of your question, the transition. To my mind, the biggest part of that is, as a scholar, one is rewarded, entitled to state one's own viewpoint, to state a thesis, and that is what you're rewarded for doing. As a judge, it is diametrically opposite. One's personal viewpoints really have no role in the decision of a particular case. What the judge is trying to do is to make the best sense of the applicable law. And that is not to say that there is not a human element in the business of judging. We don't give these cases to an algorithm. We don't give them to a machine. We give them, in this case, to 7 individuals, each of whom has a unique perspective, has a life experience, has learning in the law, and we value that diversity of perspectives because these matters are difficult. And so part of the decisional process that goes into how to approach legal controversies is this collective enterprise governed by law that is simply not the same as what one does as a scholar, as my dean often says, as a lonely scrivener in your own office thinking your own thoughts. Now, I will just conclude my answer by saying that there are some transferable skills? Let's hope so. As an academician, what one is challenged to do is to think deeply and hard about problems, to consider arguments, counter-arguments, and counter-counter-arguments, and to leave no stone unturned in the analysis of a legal issue. I think those kinds of habits, the intellectual rigor, the openness to divergent viewpoints, the anticipation of the weaknesses of one's own point of view, all of those things are healthy and important habits for the workings of a judge. And so what I hope to offer through my own background is the development of those skills, and I would hope certainly to bring those to the bench.
Thank you, and I believe your response has spurred further questions. Justice Klein.
Well, I received a lot of letters about you from various sources. And the ones who suggested that I should maybe say no to you did so on the grounds that you had not had trial experience. Vote no on Justice Blue. He hasn't been a trial court judge. So why don't you answer the question that all those folks have wrote to me and said that, and tell us what you would say to them if they were asking you that question?
Well, first of all, I would concede the premise. I have not had trial experience. But secondly, I think I would say this. My understanding of the judicial system has always been something along the lines of the following. We arrange our courts in a hierarchy. We have trial courts, we have intermediate appellate courts, we have a Supreme Court, and then we have a U.S. Supreme Court even beyond this. And that arrangement is functional in a certain way. Law depends on stability, law depends on finality, law depends on clarity, so that people can order their lives. The hierarchy, I think, should not be interpreted as a sort of, it should be interpreted, in my view, as a differentiation of roles. And so each level of the hierarchy simply does a different job, to which the members of that level bring specialized expertise, on top of course, a general grounding in the law, but some specialized expertise, and the ability to ability to recognize the sort of zone of their expertise. On appeal, we have throughout our doctrines notions of deference, limitations on review, that serve very important functions and that recognize this differentiation of roles. And so in approaching any particular case, one has to, I think, as an appellate judge, have some humility with respect to the idea that the issue being decided has already been decided once. And so, though I do not have trial experience, I think I have a fair appreciation for what an appellate judge has to do. And the essential, one essential ingredient of that, I believe, is to express adequate and due respect to those whose judgments are under review.
Thank you, Professor Liu. Any further questions before the panel takes a vote? I have no further questions.
No, but I think everybody will be happy with that answer that you just gave. That's a nice style.
Well, this does complete the list
Thank
of
you.
witnesses who are here today. Thank you, Professor Liu. I'm going to now call for the vote and ask first Attorney General Harris, how do you vote?
I am proud to vote in favor of the confirmation of Professor Liu.
Thank you. Presiding Justice Dempsey Klein, your vote.
I'd be pleased to vote for you, sir.
And I also join in the chorus to vote to confirm.